In our episodes, we discuss cases and topics that might be distressing or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Cardinal Crimes, and I just want to say right up on the top, it just occurred to me that when last week's episode is going to be published, it will have been our 1-year anniversary. I started this podcast a year ago, and I started it just because I really enjoy researching cold cases, and I wanted somewhere to share that information and spread the word about unsolved cases in Iowa that I think need more attention. In the process, we have shared so many stories. We've interviewed some really interesting people, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done over the last year. So I want to thank all of you for being here, and I can't wait to see what the next year holds. Now, lately, I have been doing a ton of research into serial rapists and serial killers. I usually cover cold cases, but if you didn't know, in addition to this podcast that I do as a hobby, I also research for a UK-based true crime podcast called True Criminals, and I just spent a ton of time researching Joseph DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer. Now, while most know him by that name, he started out as a burglar called the Visalia Ransacker, and his crimes eventually escalated into serial rapes, where he was known as the East Area Rapist. And ultimately, his crimes escalated again to serial murder, where he was known as the original Night Stalker until he was dubbed the Golden State Killer by true crime author Michelle McNamara. And I mentioned this in a previous episode, but crimes like DeAngelo's and those of other serial rapists like Russell Williams in Canada are some of the few types of cases that genuinely make me feel terrified. And I think what it is beyond the horror of the murders and assault is that they really stalk their victims ahead of time. And they would sometimes enter the homes of their victims prior to the actual assaults. Surviving victims have reported that in the weeks before those assaults, they had suspected that someone was in their home. There were items move around, things missing, stuff like that. And it's this idea that someone could be walking through your home, touching your things, and you would have no idea. It really gets to me. Now, during my master's degree, I did research on another serial rapist that I hadn't heard of. Between 1991 and 1998 in the DC area, 10 women were sexually assaulted by a man dubbed the Potomac River Rapist. The last victim, Christine Mirzayan, was murdered. For years, these cases remained unsolved. The surviving victims were haunted by their experience, and the loved ones of Christine Mirzayan had to move forward with no answers. So today, I want to talk about those 10 victims, and I want to talk about the behavior exhibited by the offender and the ultimate conclusion to the story. Now, today's episode is only going to scratch the surface. If you want more information about this case and a deeper dive, go check out American Nightmares Season 3. They cover this case, and that season is called Unknown Subject. But let's get started. Let's start with victim number 1, who was assaulted on Monday, May 6, 1991. Now, between 8 and 11 p.m., a 32-year-old woman had just gotten home from a business trip she'd been on for a few days. She lived alone, so it was just her. Now, she parks her car, walks up the steps, and goes inside her front door just like normal. But as soon as she gets inside and shuts the door, she is ambushed by a man. He throws a blanket over her head, ties her hands with a phone cord, puts something sharp to her neck, and rapes her. The assault lasts 10 to 15 minutes. Now, he never beats her, and she doesn't resist. And after it's over, he grabs her purse and leaves with about $80 in cash. Now, she's able to contact police, and they begin to investigate and find that all the windows and doors in the home were locked. And this was a brand new house in a newer development type neighborhood where construction was ongoing. Police later found muddy footprints in the basement, which made them believe he got in through a basement window. And in the dining room, there was a chair set up facing a little pocket window that overlooked the driveway. And that just makes you wonder, how long was this man sitting there watching? How long was he just waiting for her to get home? Right away, investigators knew that this was a planned assault. Not only was it because they could tell based on the chair that he had been sitting and waiting for this woman to arrive, but they also found that the phone lines had been cut. Now, this first victim, victim number 1, didn't want the incident investigated. She didn't go to the hospital and wasn't interested in having a rape kit done, so there was no DNA from this assault. But detectives did try to identify the offender. They started looking at the construction companies because, again, this was a new build and there was construction going on in the area, so there were a lot of people in and out. They went to some of the builders and subpoenaed lists of workers, subcontractors, and electricians. Basically, anyone who could have had a key or had been in that house during its construction. And they tried to cross-reference those names for criminal histories, but there were thousands of people on those lists. Then, 4 months later, there's a second victim. Between 10 and 10:30 p.m. on September 5th, 1991, an 18-year-old babysitter named Kelly was attacked inside of a home in a new subdivision 6 miles from the first attack. She was at home babysitting, but over the course of the night, Kelly's boyfriend had visited, and after he left, she began to watch TV. Now, at some point in the night, Kelly said she had walked out to her car to grab a book, and she said while she was outside, she had a feeling that someone was watching her. But around 10 or 10:30, Kelly said, and she was back in the house at that time, that she noticed that the garage door was cracked open, and she assumed that the homeowners were home because that's normally the door they would come in from. She got up to go greet them, and a man ambushed her, threw a blanket over her head, causing her to fall and hit her head on the ground. He moved her to her stomach, tied her ankles and arms behind her back, took the blanket off of her and pulled up her shirt over her head and raped her. During the assault, Kelly reported the man spoke calmly, but also taunted her, asking why she wasn't intimate with her boyfriend. Following the assault, Kelly said she could hear the man walking around the house. He was in the kitchen, rummaging through things. She said she heard him open a can of soda. And after a bit, she was certain he was going to come back for her, and she was terrified, especially because the kids she was babysitting were sleeping upstairs. Kelly said she was laying on the ground and she prayed, and that eventually she said she just had this gut feeling that God was telling her to go. She was able to break out of the ties and she tried running out the front door, but it was locked with a deadbolt that needed a key, which she didn't have. She ran up the stairs, got to a window, and started screaming. And there was a person outside who happened to be jogging by, and she said she called for help to this person. And now the jogger didn't stop immediately there to help, but ran to their own home and called police. And all the while, she has no clue where the offender is, right? Where is this guy that just assaulted her? She has no idea what he's doing, nothing. Police arrive, but the perpetrator had already fled. Now, Kelly did get to a hospital and had a rape kit done where DNA from the man was collected. Police said throughout the course of their investigation, they found that phone lines had been cut and he had gained entry through a garage window. And now, side note with this one, apparently police wouldn't actually let Kelly go to the hospital until the kid's parents got back home. And when they did, the kid's father was apparently belligerently drunk and was not understanding or sympathetic to Kelly at all. And even made comments to her insinuating that it was her fault. That just made my blood boil. Can you imagine? But regarding the investigation, they had a list of names that they were looking at. Still looking at construction-related people. They were checking arrest records from jails, but there was just nothing that was sticking out to them. And it would only be a few months later until another attack happened. Between 9 and 10 p.m. on Thursday, November 21st, 1991, a 41-year-old woman was attacked in her home, 14 miles southwest of the first two rapes. The woman lived alone and worked at multiple hospitals. She was an anesthesiologist. Now, the evening of the attack, the woman noted that there was no dial tone on her phone. And at a certain point in the night, she said she could hear knocking inside of her house, causing her to go to her bedroom and lock the door again. And again, she tried to use the phone to call someone. But she said a man then burst through her door and threw a sheet over her head. She said her wrists were tied to the headboard and the man turned the television on and increased the volume. He placed a pillowcase over her head, and as he was doing this, he was beating her, probably trying to get her to stop resisting. Now, the woman wanted to try to diffuse the situation, so she actually started trying to calm him down. And she did this by trying to just talk with him and have a normal conversation. And this definitely worked. After the man realized she wasn't going to fight, he started engaging her in casual conversation. He gave her a name, which was, obviously a fake name, but said he had seen her around the hospital. He stayed for about an hour following the rape. He apparently was just sitting there watching TV and took $30 from the bedroom dresser before he left. When police got there, they discovered, once again, the phone lines had been cut. They said that there was rope in the backyard and that he had gained entry through a second-level window, which he would have had to have shimmied up this, steel gutter downspout in order to get up there. Now, they said the window might have been open a crack and he was able to get in through it. She described the man as being 5'8" with a medium build and was wearing a ski mask, and she couldn't identify his race. She added and told police that for approximately a week before the assault, she believed someone had been in her home due to items being out of place. She said things were missing, moved around, there were things missing from her fridge, stuff like that. Now, this was an upscale neighborhood, and I'm not sure if this was a neighborhood in development like the others, but it was definitely a nicer area. And as investigators looked into the case, they were thinking about what the offender said, that he had seen her around at the hospital. Now, they weren't sure if this was actually true, but they thought that he might have been able to gather that she worked at hospitals from him being in the home previously. Like maybe he saw a work ID or something lying around. At this point, with victim number 3, there are some distinct similarities between the cases, and investigators are starting to believe they have a serial rapist on their hands. Less than 1 month later, 12 miles north of the previous assault, between 8:30 and 9 p.m. on Wednesday, December 11, 1991, a 36-year-old woman was attacked in her home. Now, this woman's husband was away on a business trip, but she was home with her children. One had just gone to bed and the other was still awake. The perpetrator gained entry to the home through a dining room window. He covered her head with a sheet and attempted to rape her, but she really fought back. He hit her in the head, dragged her across the living room floor, but she kept fighting. As she was fighting, the victim reported that he yelled, "Stop fighting me, bitch, I don't want to hurt you." The man was unable to obtain an erection and eventually left, but they were still able to get DNA from her when she went to the hospital to be examined. Now, like the other cases, the phone lines to the home had been cut, and the home alarm system had been disabled. She described the man as being black, clean-shaven, with a medium build, and an educated-sounding voice, and that he was wearing heavy gloves. Now, this home in particular was a couple years old, but it was in this suburban subdivision, and there was still construction going on in the area. By this time, investigators knew for sure they had a serial rapist. Just 1 month later, at approximately 9 p.m. on Friday, January 24th, 1992, victim number 5 is assaulted. The victim was a 34-year-old live-in housekeeper, and she was attacked at her employer's home. The homeowners were away for the evening, and the perpetrator gained access through a second-story window. He had placed a chair by a gutter to climb to the window, and he used a screwdriver to pry it open. Like the other cases, the man threw a sheet over the woman's head. The woman, though, fought back so hard that he was unable to rape her, and there was no DNA able to be collected. Despite that, though, investigators did believe that this rape was connected to the others because of those similarities, and namely the sheet being thrown over the head. That was like the one consistent thing they were seeing with all of these cases. But with this specific case, he beat her over the head so severely with a boombox before leaving, she needed serious medical attention. And this was a level of violence that really hadn't been seen yet with the other cases. When police got there, they were doing their investigation, talking to neighbors, and a neighbor told police that they had seen a man hiding behind the AC unit of the home and walking around the house for a period of time before the assault, but that this neighbor just never reported it. Didn't think that was strange, didn't think to tell anybody about it, never called the police. Crazy. Now, at this point, I think is when police start publicly saying that there's a serial rapist on their hands. They start urging the public to start neighborhood watch programs, be more alert to strangers, and to get security systems. But what they couldn't figure out was how the suspect was picking the victims. That was something that was stumping them. But after this assault, victim number 5, the assaults just stop. There is nothing for the rest of 1992. There is nothing in 1993, at least no other incidents that have these similarities. That is until March 8th, 1994. Between 7 and 8 p.m., a 35-year-old woman was at home with her young children when she was attacked. Her husband was away from the home at the time of the assault. The man came up behind her while she was holding her baby, told her to put the baby down. He put a pillowcase over her and raped her. Now, he began talking to her and knew these details about her life. Like, he knew that her husband was a car salesman. He said her husband had sold him a car and that the engine had blown up. And the woman said the day prior, someone called their house, and it was this guy who had like the same exact story. This guy called their house the day before and said he was upset about a car that was sold to him with an engine that had blown up. And I don't know if they actually ever determined, like, I don't think that was ever a thing. Like, I don't think there was ever a car. I don't know. But following the rape, the man took the keys to the family's like Corvette and drove off, which police found the car was abandoned a day later. And in this instance, DNA was able to be collected. Now, there was a 2-year break before, and there's another 2-year break. But on July 20th, 1996, victim number 7 is attacked. Between 8:30 and 8:45 p.m., a 58-year-old woman was attacked while walking in the Palisades neighborhood of Washington, D.C. She reported being grabbed while walking alone. She was dragged into the woods, severely beaten and raped. She described the man as being Hispanic or black, tall, with a heavy build, and neatly dressed in like a collared shirt with these chino-type pants. And this was really a departure from previous cases, right? Like, she was outside walking, whereas all of the other victims were attacked in their homes. Now, there's a shorter break in between victim number 7 and victim number 8. It's just 7 months later. Between 7 and 8 p.m. on Wednesday, February 26, 1997, a 19-year-old woman was attacked in her residence in the Rock Creek Manor community when she came home from work. Now, her unit was in this like crowded townhouse-style community, and it was a middle unit. And normally, her and her mother would return home at the same time, but on the day of the assault, the daughter actually returned home early. The perpetrator had gotten inside by prying open a sliding door, and he was just waiting inside for her. The man threw a blanket on her head, raped her, and during the encounter, he spoke to her, and she said that afterwards she could hear him walking around looking through stuff, and he left with a small amount of cash from a birthday card. 9 months later, we have the next attack. Between 7:30 and 8 p.m. on Friday, November 14th, 1997, a 30-year-old woman was attacked in a home she was renting after returning from a grocery store. The owner of the unit was a female Navy officer, and she was away and was renting out the home to this woman. Now, the perpetrator confronted the woman, threw a blanket over her head, pushed her into a bedroom, and raped her. And when he left, the victim said that she could hear the man go outside and scream in a manner she described as a victory scream, which is so gross. It was later discovered also that when the man got inside the house, he had managed to get 2 dogs that were living in the house who were known for being quite vicious into a side bedroom prior to the assault. And interestingly, he had also unscrewed multiple light bulbs in the home. On Saturday, August 1st, 1998, we have our final victim, victim number 10, Christine Mirzayan. Now, Christine Mirzayan was a 29-year-old Georgetown student and intern who was reported missing to Georgetown campus police on Sunday, August 2nd, by her husband who lived in San Francisco at the time. Her body was found later that day in a wooded area off Canal Road, which was a busy street near the entrance to the campus. Christine was found lying on her back with her arms spread, her unfastened bra around her neck. Her pants, shirt, and underwear were inside out, lying to the left of her head. Her head had been crushed with a nearby rock that was huge. It was 73 pounds. Her purse, which contained her ID, credit cards, and cash, wasn't initially found. Now, an autopsy revealed she had been struck in the head 3 times and had been raped. Semen was collected from her body, and there was evidence she had been placed in a chokehold. And they believed or estimated that she had been dead for approximately 15 hours prior to being discovered, meaning she had likely been murdered Saturday night between 10:30 and 11 p.m. 4 months later, there was a nearby canal which had been drained, and her purse was found in the bottom of it. And there was a brick inside of it, presumably to ensure that it sunk. So this kind of shows that the perpetrator probably didn't want her to be identified very quickly, so her ID and all of her stuff was in her purse, so he put a brick in it, threw it to the bottom of the canal. Now, the night of her murder, 2 witnesses believed that they saw her walking near where her body was discovered, and that they saw a well-built black male wearing a polo walking about 50 yards behind her. That Saturday, before she was murdered, Christine's friends told police that she had been with them at a casual barbecue and left to return to her dorm around 10 p.m., and she walked home by herself. So those are the 10 victims that we have here, and I kind of want to just talk about some of the things that I noticed when reading about all of these assaults. Now, he had a clear MO of using a surprise attack approach to catch his victims, right? In each of the cases, it's clear that he stalked and surveilled them. And based on this knowledge, he knew when they would likely be alone, and he knew personal details about them. But the distinct factor in all of the cases that enabled most of them to be linked prior to sophisticated DNA testing was the use of a sheet to cover their heads. Now, this was done by him to try to better conceal his identity, but was also a key factor in his surprise attack approach. Now, one of the most common elements among all these cases was that the women were in these newer build homes or communities with ongoing construction in the area. And now, like I said before, it's unclear how he specifically chose each victim, but it's clear that they were targeted and surveilled prior. The assaults all, to me, seemed very planned out. Like, he knew their schedules, he knew when they would be alone, he knew personal details about them, and he did a lot to, I think, minimize his chances of being caught. One, there was the ski mask. He'd throw the sheet over their heads so they couldn't see him, but he also did things like cutting phone lines. And to me, I felt like the offender was familiar with the areas that he was going to pick out his victims. And I feel like because he was able to surveil them to the extent that he did, to me, that showed that he was probably able to spend a lot of time in these areas without standing out. And I think that kind of goes to investigators' original job of looking into construction companies. Because the neighborhoods were so varied, he would need to spend a lot of time in each of these neighborhoods. How would you do that without sticking out and being a stranger? To me, that showed he was probably working on one of these construction crews. Let's look at the evidence that they had. The most significant piece of evidence recovered from each victim, with the exception of victim number 1 and victim number 5, was DNA from the perpetrator. But all of these assaults, again, occurred in the 90s, and the technology for DNA analysis was just not sophisticated enough, right? It actually wouldn't be until the early 2000s that all of these cases were officially linked through DNA analysis, and it wouldn't be until 2019 that a suspect was identified using genetic genealogy, and we will get to that. Now, aside from the DNA, little evidence was recovered, right? Investigators were able to discover how the offender gained entry by finding the various items like chairs, propped up against walls, muddy footprints, all of that. And through the interviews with witnesses and the victims, there were multiple composite sketches that were produced. Now, when looking at the crime scenes, I thought that overall they were fairly organized, and this was based on the level of planning and surveillance that went into almost every attack. But certain assaults, I thought, did show both characteristics of being organized and disorganized. And if you know anything about like the concept of organized and disorganized offenders and stuff like that, it's not like one or the other. It can definitely be a range. And so for victims number 5, 7, and 10, those instances appear to have gone wrong for the offender. These instances, victims number 5, 7, and 10, were the most violent, with the final assault resulting in murder. Now, victim number 7 and Christine Mirzayan, victim number 10, were both attacked outdoors while they were walking alone. This, to me, was really uncharacteristic of the perpetrator, who usually attacked the women in their homes. And to me, it's like, I wondered if the offender was possibly unable to control his urges and spontaneously attacked these women. The brutality of the outdoor attacks, to me, possibly shows that the offender would lose his ability to control his anger and violence when he wasn't in a controlled environment. It's so much more risky attacking someone outside. When you're inside, you have the cover of being indoors. You're outside, I feel like there's so much less control. There's so much more risk. So was that contributing to him becoming more violent? I also noted when I was looking through each of these cases that he would become more violent with resistant victims. And this was observed to a degree with victim number 4, but especially with victim number 5, the live-in housekeeper, who was severely beaten. And the brutality of the attack for victim number 5 and his inability to rape her is possibly because the victim might not have been the intended target, but also I think because of the amount of resistance. I wondered, based on certain elements of the crime scenes and the victim's accounts, that he would rummage through their fridge, drink soda, sit and just chat with them, watch TV. I wondered if a part of the fantasy for him included this like idea that it was a consensual encounter. And he'd obviously become more violent the more that they resisted because he wanted more control. But I wonder too if like the more they resisted, that went directly against his fantasy of it being this like consensual sexual encounter. And with the women that resisted the most, he wasn't able to obtain an erection. Adding to that too, he also said with victim number 4, he specifically stated he didn't want to hurt her. So that's why I really think that that was part of it. And so I really wondered if he had this fantasy of wanting to be with a consenting adult. And so I wondered that maybe in his real life, if he felt as though he didn't have any power or control in personal relationships, I wondered if he was looking to kind of assert masculinity and control and dominance through these assaults on other women. I'm just going through my notes of my paper here from my master's degree project on this case. Again, I talked about all of the homes being near or in these new construction neighborhoods. So I thought that rather than being a resident of one of the communities, I thought he probably worked at them, which would enable him to be able to surveil the victims for an extended period of time. So let's talk about who they ultimately identified as a suspect. In 2019, through the use of genetic genealogy, they were able to identify a man named Giles Warrick. And at this point, Warrick was living in South Carolina. And they initially interviewed him, and that interview is played on the American Nightmare podcast, which I'll link. In this interview, they obtain a DNA sample from him, and they gather some information. And he does eventually deny involvement. He shuts down, asks for a lawyer. It was all pretty standard. Despite Warrick really shutting down, investigators did eventually arrest him and charge him with the sexual assault and the murder of Christine Mirzayan after that initial interview in 2019. And they actually suspected at a certain point that he was attempting to flee. After the arrest, police identified what they would describe as like a goodbye letter to his fiancée at the time. The letter read, quote, "I'm so sorry this ended this way. I left you in a mess. I never meant for this to happen." Now, despite the DNA evidence against him, Warrick did maintain his innocence, but just 11 days before his trial was set to begin, he was found dead in his cell by an apparent suicide. Now, they did discover over the course of the investigation that Warrick owned a landscaping business, and he also worked installing electrical cables. So even though these cases and Warrick never went to trial, I think the DNA evidence against him, right? All of the DNA led right back to him. He was in the area of all of the assaults. I think despite there not being a trial and, a full-on conviction, I think it's pretty clear that they got the guy. So once again, if you are interested in learning more about this case, I will link to it in the show notes to a more in-depth podcast where they go over all of it. It's a really well-done podcast, a lot of information. And I had actually posted my write-up of this because the class that I did this research for was for a criminal investigative analysis course, which is just another word for criminal profiling. And I wrote up this whole profile and I had posted it on the Unsubs Facebook page, which is a fan group for the podcast, The Consult. If you don't know, you should definitely check out The Consult. It's a really great podcast. But Julia Cowley, the FBI profiler that we've had on the podcast before, said she concurred with my assessment and wouldn't be surprised if he had a prior history of burglaries. And this case overall really reminded me of the Golden State Killer. Just the way that he would act, the surveillance of the victims beforehand, rummaging through their items, eating their food, drinking soda in their house. It was all so similar to what Joseph DeAngelo would do. And again, a lot of these victims reported just feeling like someone had been in their home beforehand. Those are the things that really haunt me. It's really creepy. It's really eerie, but I want to know what you think about this case. Let me know on social media. Send me an email. We should have a new episode next week. Another cold case from Iowa that is 1,000% solvable. And then we might take a couple week break for the holidays, but we will see. So once again, thank you all for being here and listening, and we will see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and sharing this episode with others. You can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with the handle @CardinalCrimes, and you can send us any case suggestions, questions, or topics you would like covered there or to our email, cardinalcrimes@gmail.com. Until next time, friends, take care of each other and take care of yourself. If you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, there's no better place to begin than with Buzzsprout. It's the platform I use, and it makes publishing, promoting, and tracking your episodes so easy, even if you're not tech savvy. Plus, they help you get listed in all the major directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. And here's the best part. When you sign up for a paid Buzzsprout plan using my affiliate link, you'll get $20 off, and you'll be supporting the show at the same time. Just head to the description of this episode to find the affiliate link. Now, let's get back to the episode.